This is the Media Habits Survey by the Frontal Fairies by Kassandra, Andrade, Abril, Lizarraga, Hannah, Lopez, Sarah, Santibanez, and Rive, Snagg.
Introduction. Operational definition within our study was defined as variable 1 being unprotected sex will be identified as sexual activity that involves contact with a person's genitalia, including oral sex, which it lacks a barrier that aids in the prevention of conception or sexually transmitted infections. For a second variable, sexualized media, it was identified as any suggestive material that isn't explicitly sexual, for example, pornography or physical nudity. Prior research sounding the topic states our analysis consistently showed that early sexually explicit material exposure starting in 8th grade is related to risky sexual behaviors in emerging adulthood, including early sexual debut, unsafe sex, and multiple lifetimes of sexual partners. The hypothesis of our study was, as exposure to sexualized content increases, the perceived barriers to using protection increases as well. And our purpose of our study, or the purpose of our research, is to understand how sexually suggestive media affects Chaffey College students, and to create an awareness to the public that non-explicit sexualized content can normalize and increase the likelihood of engaging in risky sexual behavior, such as unprotected sex, similarly to viewing explicitly sexual material.
So for our study, we had a total of 20 participants, and they were all college students from Chaffey College. Most of our participants were female, with 18 females and 2 males. The ages ranged from 18 to 44, with an average age of about 27.85. For ethnicity, about half of our participants fell into one category, which was 50%, and the rest were spread out across different categories, with smaller percentages, like 20%, 15%, 10%, and 5%.
On this next slide for the methods, we are going to be talking about the materials and procedure. So the survey design was using a 5-point Likert scale, 1 equaling strongly disagree and 5 equaling strongly agree. We measured exposure to sexualized media and protective sex behaviors, and we also included reverse-coded items. Some example questionnaire items were, for the sexualized media exposure questions, an example we used was, I often encounter sexually suggestive videos while browsing social media platforms. An example of an irrelevant question we used is, I enjoy cooking meals at home. And an example of a reverse-coded question is, I almost never encounter sexually suggestive videos on social media. Thank you for listening to this slide presentation. This was Sarah speaking.
Okay, so for this part, I'm going to go over our participants' procedure and how we analyzed the data. We had 20 college students from Chaffey College during spring 2026 semester. We collected basic demographics like age, gender, ethnicity, and participation was completely voluntary. For the procedure, we distributed our survey online through Google Forms, and it took participants about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. All of the responses were anonymous, which helped people feel more comfortable answering honestly. For data analysis, we used SPSS to analyze our data. We calculated descriptive statistics like the mean and standard deviation, and we also used a Pearson correlation to examine the relationship between our variables. Overall, we were looking at how the variables were related to each other.
Hi, this is Sarah speaking. So next we're going to be talking about demographics tables. So in table 1, we're looking at our participant genders, and there are 2 males, 18 females, 0 non-binary, and 0 other listed in our survey. And for table 2, we're going over the participant age. There's 3 people who are 18 years old, 5 who are 19 years old, 1 person who is 20, 1 person who is 21, 1 person who is 25, 1 person who is 30, 1 person who is 32, 1 person who is 33, 1 person is 35, and 4 people are 42, and 1 person is 44. And for our table 3, we have the participant ethnicity. There's 4 people who are white, 3 people who are black, 11 people who are Hispanic or Latino, and 2 people who are Asian or Pacific Islander, and 1 person who is listed as other. Thank you so much for listening. Next is going to be Abril speaking.
Hello, my name is Abril. I will be presenting my section of results. So our hypothesis was that as the exposure to sexually suggestive media increases, the protection barriers during sex decreases. This hypothesis was not supported as we did a Pearson's R correlation test that concluded that there was a significant relationship between sexually suggestive media and protective barriers during sex. It concluded that it was R with a participant of 20 equaled 0.138. Now, the hypothesis was not concluded or not supported, and this was concluded as the alpha value was below the p-value. There was a small effect size of R squared equal 0.019, which means that 1.9% of the variance in unprotected sex frequency is predicted from sexually suggestive media. The mean standard deviation, Cronbach's alpha for sex frequency and communication skills are listed in this upcoming table along with medium and maximum. So here are these 2 rows display the variables that were measured, and for variable 1, exposure to sexually suggestive media, the minimum was 2.1, the maximum was 4.6, the mean was 3.49, the standard deviation was 0.64982, and Cronbach's alpha was 0.889. This Cronbach's alpha value tests the reliability of the responses in our survey. 0.889 is considered high or reliable. So in this case, we will be taking this into high value or high consideration. For the second variable, it is protection variables during sex. The minimum for this was 1, maximum was 3.43, The mean was 1.7240. Standard deviation was 0.73615. And the Cronbach's alpha was 0.95. This is extremely high, and this means that the responses in the survey are considered extremely reliable. So continuing that, the exposure to sexually suggestive media scale demonstrated strong internal reliability as mentioned, as well as protection variables during sex scale. The scatter plot that was revealed between the correlation of the 2 variables revealed that there was no linearity or homoscedasticity between sexually suggestive media and protection barriers during sex. There was histograms for the 2 variables with superimposed normal curves, which met the assumption of normality for sexually suggestive content. However, it did not meet it for protective barriers during sex, as this one was skewered. And using a criteria of 3.5 standard deviation or higher, Z-scores were created to identify outliers, but none were found. No data from participants was incomplete, and on top of that, no participants were excluded from the study, as none of them had, did not meet the requirements. All of the people who participated in the survey and answered were included, as they all met the age requirement, and on top of that, none of them had a low reliability score. Thank you so much.
Discussion. Explanation. The purpose of the study was to gain a better understanding of sexually suggestive content exposure and if it has a correlation to protective barriers during sex. Does this correlation increase or decrease risky behavior? Studies found that early exposure to sexually suggestive content in adolescence leads to a higher frequency in sexual activities. The more exposure to sexual content one has, the more one is likely to engage in sex or sexual acts. Due to an increase in sex and sexual acts, individuals may try to experiment by acting in risky behaviors such as unprotected sex. Discussion. Limitations. A valid research should have at least 10% of the pool population. However, the research had a significantly less amount than that, around 3%. The research only included 20 participants as it is believed that the survey was not shown to the entire population. Gender variance between participants where the number of female participants greatly outweighed the number of male participants. This may have produced a gender bias that could have skewed the data. Mark and Jakowski found that participants are more likely to be dishonest or give socially desirable responses to survey items regarding sex. Cultural, political, and even social constructs could have further pushed the narratives for each gender. Discussion. Implications. Previous studies have shown that sexualized media exposure in people increase their likelihood to engage in unconventional sex or sexual activities. Chadwick Brown and Dinjik, 2024, Musbashara, 2024, found that exposure to pornography in adolescence leads to risky sexual behavior as an adult, including unprotected sex. Implications for increased exposure revolve around teen pregnancies, single parenthood, and even divorce rates. A decrease in exposure can lead to lower populations and later in life births, which has its own health hurdles. All implications depend on correlation relevancy. Discussion. Future direction. Further studies should focus on the relationship between present sexual content exposure and sexual activities including sex. It is possible that other sexual activities, not just unprotected sex, are a contributing factor to a similar study as it can showcase another aspect of the impact of sexualized media. A better understanding of sexual intentions before committing the actual act of sex could contribute to how a person may perceive protection. For future studies, the definitions of risky sexual behavior and sexualized media should be discussed. A desensitized population may come up with results that differ from hypotheses based upon personal beliefs instead of objective definitions.
Hi, this is Sarah speaking. This is our references slide. We listed 6 references on this slide. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. The Frontal Fairies loved gathering this research for you.